Howdy folks, Shell Presto here. Awesome artist, remarkable writer, and undaunted luminary of my time. I got my pens. If you were watching last time, you remember I lost one, finally destroyed the other, and then left the cap off my third, so back to having my good inking pen. I also use 005 and 01s just as much as, if not more than that one, but still an important part of my repertoire. Alright. Now today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be trying to actually figure out how I'm going to shade this sucker. Because technically this guy is really buried, so most of this image should be black. And we're going to work on that. While we work on it, we're going to talk about something that a lot of people, if you're an artist, I don't know who all follows me on here. I know there's some artists. I know some people are writers, some people are into comics. I occasionally do comics and otherwise do writing and illustration. So my books that I do with my husband are short stories and novels that have like an illustration per chapter. So that's where I'm usually at in all this. But anyway, if you're an artist, then people are going to want you to work for exposure. What is working for exposure? Working for exposure is when usually people don't pay you, or they pay you a radically reduced rate on the promise that there's some intangible value that they can give you, usually publicity. Should you work for exposure? Usually not. A lot of people, okay, here's the thing of it. A lot of people are not big enough to actually help you if they want to pay you in quote unquote exposure. The really big people are successful, and successful people have money to, pay you. Does that mean that no one will be able to help you in terms of, there's no reason to ever work for exposure? Well, no, but you have to be very careful and have a plan when you want to work for exposure. And usually, if you're going to work for exposure, you want to be approaching people, not the other way around. Everyone and their brother and their dog is going to, want you to work for exposure, and most of those people are not going to be able to help you. I get, not every we'll say every other comic book convention I go to, at least, I will get someone approaching me, wanting me to work for exposure, the future promise of money, or to work on a project now and get paid later when the project is done and it makes a lot of money. So, but why might you want to work for exposure? What can it do for you? Well, I'm going to use an example from an art buddy of mine who has actually spent a good chunk of this year and is going to continue spending a chunk of this year working for exposure. Why is he working for exposure? And what's his purpose? Well, this art buddy of mine, I mean, he's a good artist. He's a really, really good artist. But he's a little rusty. He's been doing comic books for a long time, but he took a long hiatus. And he's trying to get back in the groove. He is actually planning to try to be a full-time artist soon. He has a normal day job right now. And he's never had a client base. He doesn't have a... Your portfolio should always be more recent pieces. You know, like if you pile up all the artwork I've done in my whole life, you'd be able to find enough pieces to fill a portfolio. But you know, if you haven't been drawing recently, your portfolio should be recent pieces to show what you can do right now. So he was feeling pretty rusty. He wanted to practice. And he wanted to do work for other people. Like, it's perfectly acceptable to essentially figure out your own, to create your own jobs for portfolios. Like, you know, you can download an unused comic strip or script. You can download an unused comic script, or you can create a project for yourself. Like, you know, you can create an alternate CD cover for an album or something like that. Like, you can create your own project to build your portfolio. Your portfolio should contain the sort of artwork you want to do. So if you want to do album covers, it should have album covers. If you want to do comic pages, it should have comic pages. If you want to be like a illustrator, like just do standalone illustrations, you know, you can pick a public domain book and do those. But there is something to be said for having someone, how to put it, there is something to be said for being able to follow someone else's instructions. You know, that's part of a job too. You know, potential clients will be reassured if they know that you can follow instructions. That if someone says, I want the drawing to be this size, that it ends up this size. That if they say, I want the character to look this way, that the character is actually going to look that way. And you can only get that kind of experience by doing something for someone else. But you can do your own jobs and wait and try to build up paid experience too. But this guy wants to come right out of the gate and have that kind of experience, and have recommendations from people that are already published, saying that he's good and competent, and he is good and competent. That he follows instructions well, that he's worth working for. So he's also kind of trying to build a bit of a resume in addition to his portfolio. But he's selected people he wants to work for free to do this. Now, I don't know, I don't know his plan. He didn't hand me an outline of what he's doing, although we've talked a bit about it. But it's between talking a bit about his plan and observing what he's doing, he's taken some really good steps to make his working for exposure worthwhile. So, what's my art buddy doing? Firstly, he carefully observed the people. Well, I should say, firstly, he's a fan of the things he's doing. All the work that he has been doing has been for sci-fi or fantasy authors that he enjoys. And not huge sci-fi and fantasy authors. Wow, I read so many old books, I don't know if I know a sci-fi or fantasy author offhand or living sci-fi or fantasy author offhand to say that isn't like a lower level one. Like I think the latest, I think David Stewart is the latest, or David Stewart is the biggest, quote unquote, sci-fi fantasy author that I've downloaded a book from recently. Okay, R.A. Salvatore, he's still writing books. R.A. Salvatore is a big fantasy author. He's not contacting R.A. Salvatore and offering to do work for him because, Tim Powers. I should say Tim Powers. Tim Powers is a great author. So he's not contacting R.A. Salvatore and Tim Powers and saying, hey, I'd like to do work for you. R.A. Salvatore and Tim Powers both have plenty of money to get whatever artist they want. They're beyond that. Plus, their stuff is handled by big publishing companies now. So you wouldn't even contact those authors. You'd end up, trying to contact a publishing company, and the publishing company would be like, no, we only need this art for this, and blah, 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 blah. No, he's contacting quality, lower tier authors like Mike and myself. That's actually how I met this particular guy. But before he reaches out and contacts them, so first he reads their work, and he picks things that he, he enjoys, but two, that he would be proud to attach his name to. There's I don't know exactly how to. Well, we'll use the example of, I really like the Kingsman movies. I think they're funny. I think they're great. They're also rated R, and they are ridiculously violent. I'm not saying I wouldn't want my name attached to something Kingsman-esque, but there's a chance someone might not want to, or someone might not want their name attached to something that violent for some reason or another. So you have to consider that. You should consider, you should also look at, there's a lot of political controversy out there nowadays, and culture controversy and things like that. And I'm not saying you should always consider that, but if you do something for someone that has a certain message or is in your face about something, you're gonna end up associated with that person. So even if you don't hold their political ideas, or even if you think they've gone too far or something like that, there's a chance that you can get caught up in that, and that could, it could potentially help your sales, or it could really hurt your sales and tarnish your name. And you need to consider that if the person that you're if the person you're considering working for exposure for is particularly outspoken. And I mean, people stumble into things all the time that they don't intend to do, or they misstep, and you can't help those things. But to the extent that you can help it, you should try. You should try to, and you should try to be prepared. So he very carefully watches the social media profiles of people. He looks for what they say, and what they're saying, and if they stand for anything, what they stand for, etc., etc. And then he also asks for recommendations from people that he trusts. So this guy is a fan of ours. You will be seeing some of his artwork in some Ascension Epoch projects in the future. But yeah, he reached out to us. He reached out to a couple other indie authors and said, can I do some artwork to help you out? And in return, would you use it and, say I did it and recommend me to other people for jobs? But that, missed a point there. What was my point? Missed a point, but now I can make a nice line. I'm not trying to talk and draw at the same time. But the other thing that I was going to say was he looked for people that have something to offer him. So the difference between you don't want to work for exposure for your cousin Joe who has this idea for... Now, I should say this. If you want to team up with someone and do something, if you want to collaborate and, share future projects, profits, because it's important to you and you want to do something and work with someone, that's entirely different than working from exposure. That's an artistic choice. And there's ups and downs to that too, and that's a different topic. I'm talking about strictly, for the promise of doing something, like, your distant cousin who you barely know, but who wants help in their thing, and that they're not gonna... Doing that is strictly a kindness. They're not gonna have anything to offer you if they're not a name yet. Same for, anyone who doesn't have anything out. So, this this particular artist, he looked for people who have a body of work published. All the people he's contacted already have multiple books out. They, some of them have larger fan bases than others, but they all have a larger fan base than he does. So you want to pick someone who's more popular than you. Even if it's just slightly more popular than you. You want someone who has a larger audience to expose you to. You want to pick someone who has the right audience. You know, if this guy knew a romance author who was really popular and wanted to do work for her, that wouldn't benefit him because there's not a lot of crossover between, especially if, like, you know, she did straight up romance. Like, you know, or maybe murder mystery romances. That doesn't matter how popular she is, that wouldn't, if that's not the sort of work that he wants to do, that wouldn't benefit him. So he picked people within the genres he wants to do. He likes doing sci-fi and fantasy artwork, so he picked people in the sci-fi and fantasy genres. He chose to contact people to do work for people in that have varying skills that they can offer him. So in addition to having a larger fan base than he has, he picked people. Mike and I are very good on convention circuits. We sell well at conventions. I mean, for authors, you know. Fan artists sell better than I do at conventions because they're selling fan art. But as far as authors go, you know, Mike and I are very good at promoting ourselves that way. We've tried, you know, we're very good with websites, and you know, we're trying new things in terms of promotions. You know, we've I'm sorry, I'm choking on a cough drop here. All right, I'm better now. You know, we've teamed up with various groups in the past and run promotions on books that way. And my dogs are up. We've tried many things, and we know a good bit of what works, and we know a lot of what doesn't work, which is actually pretty valuable. More valuable than you'd think. So, you know, we're helpful in that regard. Some of the people that he contacted, oh, and my son is up. All right. Some of the people he contacted. All right. And now I got pen on my thing. Just so you folks know, the video might be sped up a bit after this point because I'm doing a voiceover again. When I draw down in the living room, there's just too much noise for me to record, and people are talking to me and stuff like that. But it's important to draw when you get an opportunity to draw, even if it's not under ideal conditions, and I've been trying to do that more often. Anyway, back to the topic. My art buddy also picked someone who's quite good at organizing Kickstarters. And organizing Kickstarters is having a friend who knows how to navigate and crowdfund and stuff like that is quite a boon. So, you know, now here's the thing of it. If you want to do something for someone in regards to crowdfunding and working for exposure, always pick one who has had successful Kickstarters. Because anyone can, you know, put a Kickstarter up. I could put a Kickstarter up right now for a project, and if you don't organize it the right way, if you don't have not even a project that speaks to people, but present your project in a way that speaks to people. No matter how worthy the project is, no matter how skilled you are, it's going to fail. You know, so that's a real asset, knowing someone that can help you with Kickstarter. But again, you know, if you're working for money, you're working for tangibles, and there may be some recourse if, say, you're not paid. There isn't always. Sometimes you just had to eat that cost and move on, and that really, really rots. But when you're working for exposure, there's no guarantees or recourse if someone doesn't follow through on their promise, you know. So that there's an element of trust, and when you have an element of trust, there can also be an element of being let down. So that's all risk, and you have to very, very carefully assess that risk. But like I said, this friend did their homework, and you know, they're willing to take that risk, and there could be benefits for it in the future. So you should also, if you're going to work for exposure, assess how big an audience the person has, or what the dollar value on any Kickstarters they've done has been. You know, someone can throw up a $200 Kickstarter and say, oh, I met my goal and I'm successful at Kickstarter. And that may be true, but, you know, in the grand scheme of things, getting people to give you $200 is not that hard. And I'm not saying it's particularly easy, but there's a big difference between someone that can do a, you know, $200 Kickstarter and a $2,000 Kickstarter or an $8,000 Kickstarter. And how big a crowd and how many people they get to do that. So that's something to consider. You should, before doing work for exposure for anyone, take a look at, you know, if they're author or publisher or something, look at their Amazon rank for their books, look at their social media profiles and see how many people are following them. And also you should look at how much interaction they get. For example, I did some experimenting with Facebook ads myself a couple of years ago, and we got a lot of, we'd get a lot of likes and we'd get a lot of people following our page. But when we looked, now, it's entirely possible that, you know, that we have a lot of, I'm not, how to put it. There's a chance that whatever you are doing can be very popular in, you know, India, Africa, Asia, and Russia if you're not from there. That's entirely a possibility. But there are also click farms in those countries where they just pay people to like pages for money to build other people's social media profiles. And you can say, oh, well, I'm not paying them to bolster my numbers. But the companies that do this, they say they do it for a car company. Well, they also have to do it for if they just did it for car companies, Facebook would flag them and say you're artificially inflating these things to offer people ad services. So they have to click on other people's things too to make it look like they're not targeting one specific brand or company or something like that. So, we paid for targeted Facebook ads, and despite paying for targeted Facebook ads, we ended up with a lot of artificial follows like that. And that hurts you overall because Facebook tends to only show your stuff to 10% of your audience. And then if that 10% engages with you often, then it'll show it to another 10%, so then 20% of your audience sees it. And if they engage, then 30% of your audience sees it. So it grows like that. So let's put it this way. Let's say you have 10 real fans following your page on Facebook. And whenever you share something, 9 of those fans interact with it. They like it, or they comment, or they reshare it. Then all your fans are always going to see your work. But let's say 3 people are your actual fans, and 7 people are from click farms, and they only liked your page just to throw off what would essentially flag them as bots or fake accounts or anything like that. Well, there's already a 70% chance that when you make a post, the 10% that Facebook shows it to isn't going to be any of your fans. It might be one of your 3 fans. And if it's one of your fans and 2 of those fake accounts, then you're going to, the other 2 fans are never going to see your stuff, because one interaction or no interactions is not going to make Facebook share your post the rest of the way. So you also have to look at people's interactions if you want to work for exposure, because if they have 1,000 people following them on social media, that's particularly a problem on Facebook and Instagram, but they don't get much interaction, then working with them and having them reshare your things is not going to help. Likewise, and I intend to do a video on this, you'll get authors that solely have other authors following them. And that can be another problem too, because if it's all low-level indie authors following each other, they're producers, not consumers. And when you're trying to get word out about your thing, you need to have consumers looking at your stuff. So those are all things to consider, and like I said, I'll probably do another video on that entirely. Another thing to consider is, popularity versus suitability. So say you know someone, or you want to do work for someone and they're super popular. They're like,
not one of the top romance authors, but they're a big name romance author. And, we'll say 10,000 people like their book. And so they have an audience of 10,000. Well, that's a good number to get exposed to. If you do work for that person, then potentially 10,000 people will hear about you. And say you do hard sci-fi. You don't do romance. We're thinking about, say, your future project. Like you want to do a hard sci-fi, whatever. And especially if it's a comic and, this person's thing is romance novels. It doesn't matter how many people follow them if it's not an appropriate genre, if it's the audience isn't going to carry over. So you need to consider, is this actually related to what I want to do when you work for exposure for someone? So to recap, lots of people are going to want you to work for exposure. You should only do ones that you are interested in personally and that you feel comfortable doing. You're better off approaching people about working for exposure than taking up offers on people who want you to work for exposure. You should do your research and consider what genre people are doing, and if that's a genre that can help you with your a genre that your potential fans may be in and enjoying. You should very carefully check out the social media and public-facing profiles of people that you want to do work with and see if they give off the image that you too want to project, because people will judge you based on your friends. And you should consider the size of their audience, the potential benefits, and the intangibles of what they, well, first off, if they're willing to talk to you about what they do, and secondly, if they are good at particular marketing skills that you can use assistance with. All right, folks, I hope that topic helped someone out there. If it did, or you have any additional questions, please leave your questions in the comments below. I am still taking questions for these real-time sketch and chats for Inktober as well. So if there's anything else you want to ask, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. As a reminder, I am the illustrator and co-author of Ascension Epoch books. They're available on Amazon.com, or you can read previews and learn more about them on AscensionEpoch.com, all one word, no spaces. Book purchases do help support this channel. You can also support me through Subscribestar. We've got some fun perks going on over there. Or you can make a one-time donation through PayPal. I would love to hear about anyone else's experiences or advice on working for exposure. And I hope your Inktober is going well. I'll see you guys in the next real-time sketch and chat. And you guys have an awesome day. Presto, over and out.
You stuck around. You're getting used to the format. I've been wanting to talk about these for a little bit because they're super exciting. Now, I'm sure at some point or another I've picked up someone's mini comics or something at some point. But I haven't in a long, long time. And I've been frequenting the Marsh Makes Comics AAA Creators Discord page. And I've been making some friends on there. And everyone does really, really great work over there. But there's one guy in particular whose comics really spoke to me. I mean, Marshall Lee's comics are really great too, but they're available as digital comics. But Peter makes just the old-fashioned mini comics that you print out yourself, and there's a certain joy to them, and there's especially a certain joy to them when they're a certain level of imaginative and quality, and Peter's comics really hit that. And I'm thrilled to say that I think I was his first customer. So I bought a bunch of his mini comics, and he said I didn't have plans to print them yet, and I convinced him to do so. Like, he just had copies for himself, and well, here we are. So I just wanted to go over these a little bit, and the spirit of comics is alive in these. So the first one we're going to take a look at is actually probably the least impressive one, so that's why we're starting with it. But it's still really fun. It was done as a 1-hour comic challenge. That's one of Marsh Makes Comics. Challenges to try to do an entire mini comic in an hour. And I think he took like 2.5 hours, which seems like most people end up doing. But it's this really cool comic about who resets the traps. Like when you're playing D&D, you're going through and everything's booby trapped in the dungeon. It's like, well, who even does that? And you find other adventurers who have fallen victim to the traps and stuff like that. And it's like, well, if the trap's been set off once, why can I get into it? So this is a really cool little comic, and really well drawn for the fact that he's trying to do it as fast as possible. His next one is light on story, heavy on action. It's just a good old-fashioned cowboy comic. I love the artwork in it. Peter is really good at doing detailed backgrounds in addition to having expressive figures, and I don't know, I adore it. I mean, I like a good action comic, so this is right up my alley. And it gets extra points because this one has sound effects, but it's told without dialogue. He was trying to do a Steve Ditko style comic. I've talked about Steve Ditko before. The Question is my favorite DC hero, and he was created by Steve Ditko, and he was based on another character of Steve Ditko's called Mr. A, and Mr. A is in some hardcore comics where the penalty for good and evil is very harsh in black and white, and quite a few of those comics have no dialogue. It just tells the story through the actions of the villains and the actions of the heroes. So that's what he tried to do with this, and it was a good experiment. You did well, Peter. And then these are the comics that made me want to check out his comics. And it's his Rabbitfighter series. It's got all the joy and frenetic energy of the original Ninja Turtle comics. You've got your anthropomorphic figures here, your anthropomorphic heroes here, and they're just fighting bizarre things and dimension hopping, trying to get to a safe place, and it's pretty glorious. I actually think just did this as one of Marsh Makes Comics mini comics challenges, but then it blossomed into an ongoing series. And, it's fun, it's action packed, it's bizarre in all the best ways that a comic should be. So I just wanted to show those off and share those with you. I will leave information in the description, and I'll also pop it up on screen of an email address where if you want to get a hold of these comics, you can contact him. And, it's good old. It's actually very much so like it's reminiscent of when I actually used to get anime tapes in the mail. But you can email him and tell him which comics you'd like, and he'll figure out, he'll, get them to you. And I didn't ask him if he takes PayPal, but I'm pretty sure he does, or he'll set up an account for it. So there you go, folks. These are great. Have an awesome day. Presto, over and out.
Farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies.
Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain.